All right, K.T. McFarland, I'm so glad to have you here with me today. It's the huge question as far as I'm concerned. And it's not an easy question for me, but I suspect you have, if not an easy, a certain definitive and quick answer. Who sabotaged the Nordstream 2 pipeline?
The Russians.
How can you be so certain?
Well, first of all, U.S. intelligence had warned about it about a week or so ago. But number two, look at the timing of it. It's not an accident, right? Vladimir Putin calls up 300,000 reservists in a war that's increasingly unpopular. He knows that in order to continue to fight this war, and hopefully, from his perspective, to make some progress, he's got to get those reservists in. But what does he need to do? He needs money. You know, it's expensive to fight these wars. So he already knows the Europeans don't want his oil. They don't want his natural gas. No problem for him. He's selling it to China, to India, to Turkey. So he doesn't really worry about the European market. Therefore, he doesn't care about those pipelines as much. But by blowing up the pipelines, he does several things. One, he shoots the price of oil and natural gas sky high, right? Because that takes off of the world market a lot of energy sources. So shooting the price sky high, that's great for Vladimir Putin because he needs oil well above $80 a barrel in it so he can pay for everything else he's doing. You know, he's running out of money because the last couple of weeks and months, the price of oil has gone back down. It was quite high, and then it came back down. He needs it high again because that's how he gets his revenue. Number two, it's his source of blackmail of the European countries. He doesn't want them to continue to help Ukraine. And so how does he blackmail them? By showing them, look, I can take your energy offline anytime I feel like it. And then number three, I think it's a shot across the bow to say, well, you know, guess what's right next to those pipelines, underwater pipelines? Fiber optic cables. And we know that the Russians have mapped out where those fiber optic cables are. So the shot across the bow is saying, mess with me and I'll take out your communications.
I did not know. I sincerely, and that's why I'm going to enjoy this conversation. I did not know what your answer may be. And I find your answer so fascinating. KT, would it be fair? I was just reading up on some of maybe the critics of KT McFarland in our lead up to our conversation. And I think, would it be fair to say some of your critics would say, well, KT, she was too close or too apologetic to Russia at times. But that's the thing. You've been both ways. I think I saw somebody say, well, didn't you praised Vladimir Putin at one point regarding, I can't remember what it was, that he should have gotten did you say he should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize for something?
Yeah, it was tongue in cheek. I made a joke about it, that Vladimir Putin was the guy who deserved the Peace Prize, not Barack Obama. And it was over at Middle East potential chemical weapons. It was a tongue in cheek thing, but of course, my adversaries didn't think so. Look, I'm a Cold Warrior. I mean, I studied nuclear weapons at MIT. I worked in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. I wrote President Reagan's Star Wars speech. I mean, I am a Cold Warrior, and I'm very proud of the fact that I was a foot soldier in the effort that brought down the Soviet Union. So I don't really think anyone would too seriously get away with calling me soft on communism you never, a Vladimir Putin pal.
Or you never know these days of who they accuse of being an apologist for Vladimir Putin. Okay, no, I appreciate those bona fides, and I respect the point of view from which you give us that perspective, that certainty today, that it was Russia. Allow me to walk through skepticism, not of you, but of the quick and certain idea that this is Russia. So the first is this, and I ask you this only in the end, you will bolster your opinion, and it will satisfy my curiosity and my skepticism. When I first see this, I say this: who has incentive? And it looks to me like the incentive of having an existing pipeline to Europe actually serves Vladimir Putin. So I say to myself, why would he want to blow up his own pipeline? He needs, exactly as you said, to make energy money by delivering energy to Europe. But you're telling me he serves his incentive by skyrocketing the price of oil and gas, by further constricting supply. But isn't he depriving himself of a market by cutting off the Nord Stream pipeline?
No, the Europeans were already starting to cut them off. I mean, those two pipelines weren't delivering oil now. They were full. They were sort of, you know, they hadn't been turned on, put it that way. They were already full of oil. So no, I don't think that. And anyway, he's got to pay a little bit of a price, right? I think it's a price he was willing to pay. He knows that European market is not going to be with him. They're already cutting back on energy, oil that was coming from tankers from Russia that were going to Europe. He knows the pipeline is going to be next. We've already sanctioned him, we, the United States, we, the Europeans. So I think it was a price he was willing to pay to get the prices of oil and natural gas to go up. And as I said, he's found an alternate buyer for his product.
In China. So,
China, India, and Turkey.
China, India, and Turkey. Okay. By the way, what effect do you think this will have on, I guess most acutely, Germany this winter? People are already talking about skyrocketing inflation and skyrocketing energy prices for Germany. Will this have a huge detrimental economic effect on Germany?
Yeah, yes. I mean, energy and writ large, where is Germany going to get its energy from? It had put all of its confidence in having an energy supply relationship with Russia, deliberately so. I mean, when I worked for President Reagan told the Europeans before these pipelines were even built, he said, don't build them. Don't rely on the Russians. It's going to come back to bite you someday. The Russians always sold to the Europeans the idea that, look, our stuff is reliable. We're not like the Middle East. We're not going to have wars. Buy Russian energy. It'll be great. It'll be cheap. It's accessible. And the Germans, particularly Angela Merkel, the prior German chancellor, her idea was that if Germany and Russia were so tied economically that Russia would not become an aggressor nation. Well, she was wrong on that one because Russia has become an aggressor nation. The thing about Russia that's worth looking at in Russian history is when Russia is rich, or the Soviet Union before Russia, when they're rich, when they have a lot of money in their coffers, they do a couple of things. They have a military buildup, they have proxy wars around the world, and they invade their neighbors. And that's what they've done for the last 70 years. When they're broke, when the coffers are low, when energy prices are low, they don't have that extra money because the Russians don't make anything the world wants. I mean, who buys Russian computers, right? Who buys Russian cars? The only thing the Russians have that they can sell reliably and at high enough prices to the world is their oil and natural gas. So when the oil prices are low, they have to hunker down. So my feeling is, I'm a Reagan economic warfare person. We won the Cold War by bankrupting the Soviet Union. We could win this war with the Russians and, frankly, more importantly, with the Chinese by bankrupting them. So the way you bankrupt Russia, push the price of oil and natural gas down. Now, why? And I think it's probably worth going through to explain why. So about 10 or 15 years ago, America was importing energy, oil and natural gas, and the main sources were the Middle East, Russia. And then about 15 years ago, American engineers and scientists and computer guys, they figured out a couple of things: how to do horizontal drilling, how to do hydraulic fracturing of rock, and how to do 3D printing. That gave them the idea that, we can get shale oil and natural gas out of rocks, American rocks. And our rocks are the best rocks of any country in the world for a whole lot of reasons. So then our energy industry went full bore into developing oil and natural gas from these rocks. As a result, international prices of oil and gas went down. Why? Because our companies, privately owned, could make a profit if oil was about $50 a barrel. The Russians needed it about $80 a barrel because it paid for everything else. Similarly, Iran needed it to $80, $90 a barrel to pay for everything else. So in the Trump administration, the sort of hallmark or the sort of centerpiece of our plan was allow American energy companies to dominate, not just be energy independent, that's good, but energy dominant, with which we could set the price of international oil. And then it bankrupts our enemies, terrific for the American economy, and frankly, extremely good for the environment as companies and countries switch from dirty coal and other fossil fuels to clean, cheap, reliable, safe American natural gas.
So
but
I buy
what
it.
happened? President Biden turned it off.
Right. And listen, I buy the theory of economic warfare, and I think it's one of the things that led me to some skepticism in the beginning about who might be the saboteur, willing to consider all options. So allow me to play, if not devil's advocate, skeptic for you to answer these questions. What am I supposed to make, for example, and I don't have his exact title, was it the Prime Minister of Poland, a high-level Polish politician who in the hours, I think, if not day after the destruction.
Former Foreign Minister, but anyway, yeah.
Former Prime Minister. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Former Prime Minister of Poland who tweeted quickly a thank you. I can't remember, did he thank NATO or did he thank America directly for the destruction of the Nordstream 2 pipeline? What am I supposed to make of that?
Well, and here's the thinking behind that. He's saying, the Russians have done it, and the Poles and other former NATO leaders, current NATO leaders, current European leaders have, a number of them have come out in the last 4 or 5 days to say, yeah, the Russians did it. So by the Russians doing that, what does it do? It unifies NATO. It unifies the United States-European connection.
But he thanked the United States, didn't he? Didn't he thank the United States, not Russia? He thanked either NATO or the United States in that tweet.
I'm not sure which guy you're talking about. There are about a dozen of them who have spoken out in the last couple of days. Almost all of them that I've read that have any real credibility have said that it's the Russians. Now, what they've also said is that the result of that, the sort of knock-on effect of that, is that it unifies NATO, and it shows the Germans and others, look, do not count on the Russians being nice guys. You've got to find an alternate source of your energy. Now, if we were smarter than we are, and I think with a different president, an new American president would say, okay, stop this war on American fossil fuels. And what we really should do would be to go to the Europeans and say, we will do everything possible to make us the supplier of oil and natural gas to Europe. We'll build liquefied natural gas terminals at our end and your end. We'll help lay pipelines, but count on us for the supply of your energy. Mm-hmm. Again, cheap, reliable, no political strings attached. And sadly, I don't think we're doing that. We're talking about it, but the Biden administration, in fact, they just keep putting more and more red tape on those liquefied natural gas terminals. So in effect, stopping that export.
So I guess, KT, what I'm trying to get at, so let's just, instead of me beating around the bush or offering up this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence to either bolster your certainty or mollify my skepticism, let's just get straight to it. So there are clearly those who are saying, well, the beneficiary and the incentive lies with the United States of America to have done this, to have bombed the Nordstream 2. And the argument goes like this. President Biden warned in February, we will shut down Nordstream 2. That we can all, you, I, everyone listening can go listen to that audio. It's on audio, video. He says clearly, and he's pressed. The reporter says, how? You don't have control. The Germans have control. He says, we can do it. We will shut it down. Mm-hmm. So it sounded like a warning. I don't know if these are accurate reports. There were some reports that of U.S. Naval exercises taking place in the area of the Baltic Sea where this took place in the weeks leading up this. And I will just say this, KT, while I have all the respect in the world for you, I don't just grant the intelligence services of the United States of America with, well, they say it was Russia, so I believe they're Russia. Many of these people are the same people that said that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. I mean, literally the same people. So I can't really go, well, they've said that, so I take their word for it. So I'm going to let you just address it.
They have said that. I think, press reports have said that the intelligence community has warned the government. But as far as the U.S. government saying, no, we actually haven't done that.
Okay, we have not done that. So anyway, so I'm just going to lay it directly on your table. With all that out there, is it possible, plausible, on the table at all, that this was an act by the United States government?
Are we capable of doing it? Yes. Would it require a nation state to do it? In other words, not just a group of terrorists or a bunch of people who have a gripe against, I don't know, let's say eco warriors. Eco-terrorists. No. Yeah, not those guys. It had to be a state sponsor. It had to be a really big operation. So technically, sure, we could have done it. A bunch of countries could have done it. I don't think it's likely for a whole lot of reasons, just because the Biden administration has not done those sorts of things. They talk a lot about doing things. They issue a lot of threats, but rarely do they carry any of them out. I just think that behavior-wise, the timing of it, and what Putin's doing this particular week and next week, I think would point to the Russians. Why? Because he can now, what's he going to do tomorrow? Probably Friday, let's say. Friday, he's going to make an announcement that there were referenda in 4 eastern Ukrainian provinces. And he's going to say, they all voted to join Russia. Therefore, I'm annexing them, just like I annexed Crimea in 2014. I'm going to annex them. They're going to be part of Russia. Therefore, if anybody attacks Russia, then we can retaliate however we choose. I mean, that's part of their military doctrine. You attack the Russian homeland, all bets are off. We could use tactical nuclear weapons. We'll use economic weapons. We'll use cyber weapons. All bets are off. So I think the timing of he's calling up reservists. He's got to have something to show for the sacrifice the Russians have made in the last 7 months. So he's going to annex those provinces and say, oh, look, I got, more land for Russia. And I think that the timing of the attack against those, against those pipelines, it just all kind of fits in. And, here's the thing. It's not beyond the ability of Vladimir Putin to blame us. In fact, I do think that the Russian foreign minister, didn't he say, oh, that was America that did that? I mean, a false flag operation on their part.
Okay, that's the final question I'll ask you then. So I don't actually know if what unfolds in the next week or two will allow us to look back at this moment and say, well, that's who clearly sabotaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. But what will happen in the next week or two? It seems to me if this were an act by the United States government, then Russia would respond in kind belligerently. If it is an act of Russia as a false flag, I don't know what happens in the next week or two. What happens as fallout from this sabotage?
Well, I think there's an environmental issue, which frankly, if you really want to talk about the Biden administration, who's very concerned about environmental impacts, I can't imagine that they would do something that would be so dangerous to the environment. Put that aside. But let's say what happens in the next couple of weeks. Putin's calling up his troops. He's using economic blackmail with the Europeans, particularly with the Germans. I think that he will continue to threaten and talk about tactical nuclear weapons. I don't think he'll use them. But again, it's, you're a Texas boy, right? So what do they say in Texas? I understand the odds. It's the stakes I don't like. And so Vladimir Putin is in a position where he's cornered. He knows he cannot survive in office and probably even in this world if he doesn't show some victory at some point and if he doesn't figure out a way to rally the Russian people. So I don't think it's unlikely that he's done a false flag. He wants to be able to say to the Russians, hey, look, those were our pipelines. Look at what those nasty Americans did or those nasty Europeans did. He wants to be able to say to his people, oh, look, I'm protecting Mother Russia. Look at what those nasty Ukrainians are doing. He's got a domestic political problem as well as obviously a political and military problem in trying to fight a Ukraine war, which is now fought to a standstill.
K.T. McFarland. I didn't know where it would go, but I love the certainty and I appreciate the insight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.